I'm currently on a sabbatical and my first stop is Portugal. Welcome to my first day in Porto. Woke up earlier than usual. It was rainy and gloomy, which fit the bittersweet mood of leaving Coimbra, but Antonio told me that in that way I would get the full Porto experience, so I leaned into that thought and was happy. Quick stop at a service station for coffee, and off we would go, driving in the rain. After a 1.5-hour drive, we were in Porto. For lunch, we stopped by Padaria Ribeiro, where we had a pastry lunch feast. The absolute star was the first must-have Porto food to check off my list, their croissant, which is very different from the Parisian flaky kind, but is sturdier and sweeter, made with brioche bread. We had it with ham and cheese, and oh my God. We then settled into our respective accommodations. Antonio would be staying with his friend Filipa, and I was at a riverside room which would have had a killer view if, alas, I had a window. Because of the bad weather, we decided to do the obligatory waterproof thing to do in Porto, go to a wine cave. We would head over to Graham's Wine Lodge. Since the regular tours were already fully booked, we had to go for the vintage wine tour. This is when we decided that this would be our splurge of Porto, and it was totally worth it. Tamara, our guide, took us on a comprehensive tour of the wines. I knew nothing about port wine before this, and let's say that now I have graduated to a bit of a wine snob. I'd be lying if I said the wine tasting part wasn't at the back of my head during the entire tour, but finally the moment had arrived. What lay before us was the Ruby, the freshest of the fortified wines, deep, red, and fruity. The vintage, which is aged for a maximum of 2.5 years before bottling, and the Tawny, with the longest aging process filled with decadent flavors like caramel, nut, and lots of yum. Since Antonio and I are very important people now, our favorite was the Tawny, and we sipped on it with some chocolate truffles on the side. We would then head back to Filipa's for dinner, but not before a stop at Mercadona, which according to Antonio and Filipa is apparently the best supermarket ever. Not sponsored, but maybe someday. Antonio would be cooking bacalhau à brás, made of shreds of salted cod, onions, and thinly chopped potatoes, all bound with eggs. The trick here, though, is to not let the eggs cook, which is what made the process action-packed, where Antonio stirred the mixture non-stop without letting the eggs settle, leaving that velvety, creamy texture. It was the first time I've had this dish, and it still lingers in my mind. We ended the night with some inspiring conversation, as Filipa shared with us her travels and her passion for Tintin and graphic novels in general. It is truly energizing to meet people with so much emotion. And that was my first day in Porto. Thank you for joining me.